10-15 minutes with me talking through 18,001, where does it come from, what is it, what are the benefits. And then we've compiled, I've said host-led questions, but compiled a set of questions to enable us to prompt you to start thinking through how health and safety affects your organisation, and perhaps start to think about the extent to which AT could be useful. Then, of course, we'll make sure you've got an opportunity to ask us any questions to do with 18,001 or indeed management systems in general. And then we've got some reflections on how 18,001 could be deployed within your organisation. So we're looking for an expected duration of 75 to 90 minutes, maximum 90 minutes. I'll make sure that is a cut-off. The flexibility is really just to see the extent to which you need to contribute or want to contribute with your questions. I will touch on briefly, if you like, why I'm in the chair, why I'm talking through 18,001. I've done a mixture of work, different types of work in the last 18 years around management systems, health and safety, environmental primarily, and different types of approaches either through auditing or through consultancy or indeed through training. Auditing, I've done a lot of work in the past on behalf of the insurance industry, testing organisations, management systems and advising underwriters on the extent to which hazards, how serious those hazards were and how successfully they were being managed by organisations. So I've worked a lot with health and safety, and some of my clients I've taken through to 18,001. Okay, that's a little bit about me. Right, moving on, I think, to the practicalities. So over to you, Alex.
Okay, hi, my name's Alex from Laureus. We are recording this session later today. Once the webinar is finished, we will send you a link so you can access this video online. There's going to be some sections where we will be asking questions, and what we will ask you to do is to raise your hand, and if you have a microphone we will be able to bring you into the meeting so that you can speak and ask your question. Alternatively, if you don't have a microphone, simply type the question in the box on the screen, and we will go through the questions on there. Okay, I've put any questions on here so far, so if anyone's got any questions, then before we start, then please type them at this moment in time. Okay, other than that, I'll hand back to Nick.
All right, thanks, Alex. Okay. Thank you, Alex. Should work now. Great. Okay, so the standard, I've actually got the standard in front of me. I'm not expecting you to have, but it is a standard for health and safety management systems, highly comparable to ISO 14001 and less so 9001. OHSAS 18001 2007, its precursor, the 99 version, was actually, I'm just touching on this here, was actually explicitly based upon the ISO 14001 1996. And within the university context, it would undoubtedly be true it was plagiarised effectively, and quite sensibly so. So it's worth being aware that the pedigree, the heritage, is precisely the same as 14001, the one that I suspect you've all been involved in and found useful. It is true to say, though, that in the last couple of iterations they've moved further apart from each other, but the origins are the same. Thanks, Alex. Right, a distinct difference is how the enforcement bodies use their respective standards. The Environment Agency, interestingly, have been very active in using ISO 14001 to help them manage organisations, and often they will have prescribed it for certain organisations under certain permitting arrangements. Whereas, from my point of view, and this is very much a partial personal perspective, I'm very surprised, if not shocked, at the blind approach of the HSE in terms of looking at 18,001 as a means by which they could help manage some of their more threatening health and safety organisations. They don't do it. They keep on insisting that HSG 65 effectively replaces it. I think that must be their stance. It's not a comparable document, however. HSG 65, could I just take a... could you put your hand up if your organisation is using HSG 65 to assist them with their health and safety management system? I'll just take a moment. So, can you say that? Yeah. So Becky at Northampton's indicated that she is. The distinction I want to make actually is, well, the recent iteration of HSG 65, the 2013 version, is 50 pages. Its precursor, I think forgetting the year of the precursor, there's been 3 iterations, was 90 odd pages, so they haven't made it briefer. But it's 50 pages. Effectively, it is guidance and not a standard. You would not use those 50 pages to faithfully reproduce your system. You could use it to assist you with improving your system. But from an assessor point of view, which is part of what I've been involved with, we wouldn't look at that and be able to really test an organisation against whether or not it complied with HSG 65. However, there is a complicating factor, obviously, that HSG 65 does have special legal status, and I'm not treading on that, and I'm not directly commenting on it. But it's an important distinction. Whereas 18,001 is 9.5 pages, so a distinct difference from my point of view. Okay, moving on. Right, we thought it'd be helpful just to give you an inkling and a little bit of an insight into the extent of take-up. For simplicity, I'm comparing it with 14,001 and with ISO 9001. So there's been 54,000 certificates that I could source. I've used Wikipedia, maybe not a terrific source, but the best I could come up with. And in 2009, there were 54,000 certificates in 116 countries for OHSAS 18,001. Now, if you compare that with the most widely adopted standard in the world, which is 9001, which is over 1 million, then it's 5% of ISO 9001. 14,001, a bit more take-up there in relation to, certainly in relation to 18,001, and over 250,000 certificates, and the take-up then for 18,001 is 20% of that total. Now, why might that be? I'm going to look a little bit. So I'll talk a little bit about maybe where 18,001 is going, and perhaps touch on the potential slack there is for the market to take up. What next? So 45,001 is coming. ISO at last, I've put here. It's been a very long time coming. Not quite sure of the politics that have been involved that have hindered it. OHSAS, I do think that part of the lack of take-up is the fact that it's not an ISO. And people frequently ask me, well, what is OHSAS? What's the status of it? Finally, that impediment has been removed. So perhaps it's worth being aware, as with any sector, I suspect there will be a bit of a rush to be the first within the sector. And so perhaps that might be something for you to think about internally within your own organisations. I understand the committee draft has already been published, but we'll be going through a few iterations, I suspect, and the declared intention is for 45,001 to be published in October 2016. Annex XL, which some of you will have come across with the changes to 9001 and 14,001, because Annex XL is now the sort of normative text and is being used across ISO standards, they will have to be adopted by 45,001. And some of you, if you're starting to look at the changes to 45,001, will be picking up on the leadership clause and the integration requirement. These are, I think, massive and extensive and can have significant ramifications for organisations, and that's going to move into 45,001 as well. There will be, and there is now, I mean, Annex XL does mean that it's going to be more straightforward for the various standards to be more closely aligned. It has been disappointing, I would say, that over the last 20 years the standards have become, well, certainly over the last 5-10 years the standards have become more divergent. So Annex XL is a great opportunity to be able to start to harmonise and bring the standards together. I've asked the question at the bottom there, effect upon take-up. In terms of 45,001, I think it could be significant, bearing in mind that there's only 5% of the total number of ISO 9001 standards that are related to 18001. There's a lot of slack there. Okay, moving on. So could I invite any questions or anything that perhaps hasn't been clear, or any observations you'd like to make in relation to 18001? Perhaps raise your hand. If you can't raise your hand, then by all means type a question. I'll just give you a moment or two just to give you an opportunity. No? Okay. If I haven't said already, there's 7 of you, so it's not so plenty of opportunity if you would like to ask a question for us to be able to give you that opportunity. So, okay, I shall move on. Right, so the benefits. Fairly straightforwardly and fairly obviously, if you have an effective health and safety management system which is built around the requirements of 18001, then you will be protecting people. And related to that, you'll be minimising risk. If your system is effective, as with 14,001, so with 18,001, it should be delivering legal compliance with legislation. Now, when I raise this with organisations, there is an expectation that most companies and organisations think, well, we're compliant with legislation, don't need a standard to make us compliant. But all of my auditing experience tells me that actually the vast majority, well, certainly all organisations that I've assessed from a health and safety perspective, whether commissioned by them to undertake the test or whether working on behalf of the insurance industry, none of them are legally compliant. It is only with 18,001 or with 14,001 that really drives an organisation and means that they have to be legally compliant, because they're going to be tested by their independent assessor. Right, moving on. Assurance. Assurance for customers. Assurance certainly for insurance underwriters that the health and safety management system is effective, and indeed for employees that should be, I suspect, will be taking interest in their own well-being within their workplace. Sure. Assurance can be key, and certainly for very large organisations, it's impossible for very senior people within those organisations to know whether or not compliance to legislation is being met. And then we've seen it with 14,001 in certain industries, that it's become almost a license to trade. It certainly happened with the automotive industry at the beginning of the 2000s. So it could happen with 18,001, where some big customers insist upon it. We're not aware that that's happened within the university sector. No. Okay. Right, if you'd just like to take a moment here, I've just... are we okay? Oh, I think we've got a question.
Yeah, we have.
Right, bear with us a moment, we're going to have a look at the question. Can you see it? Okay, it's a note to us, so that's fine. Thank you. Yeah. Right, so back to university-related hazards. I've indicated, I mean, you obviously, I don't know the university sector terribly well, so I've had to sort of imagine a little bit what the related hazards might be. You will be subject to the typical traffic and pedestrian movements, manual handling for porters. But obviously with all of these laboratories there are some quite significant and extensive hazards that do need to be managed. Would anybody like to just volunteer any of your most significant hazards within your university? That's the purple text there. Just take a moment to see if anybody would like to volunteer some significant hazards. So can I invite you to raise your hand if you would like to make an observation here? Lorraine, thank you. We're going to unmute you now, Lorraine, so over to you.
Lorraine, can you hear us? Are you able to speak? Lorraine, apologies, we can't hear you. If you wouldn't mind just typing your question.
Oh, right, yes, that's interesting. Thank you, Lorraine. Just for everybody's benefit, control of contractors. I'll put up a few exclamation marks after this. Interestingly, whenever I'm working with auditors within organisations, I'm always indicating to them that the weak link in any management system, whether it's 14, 18, or perhaps biodiversity management, which I'm involved in, the weak link is contractors, absolutely. And actually, from an exposure point of view for organisations, they have got to be managed effectively, and they may not have their own management systems. I'm also picking up, Mary's volunteered, hazards we use, toxins, GMOs, radiation. Can I ask, so Lorraine and Mary, would it be true to say, without putting yourselves in a difficult position, that you have concerns about the extent of the controls around contractors and around those hazards of toxins, GMOs and radiation? Any thoughts, if you'd just like to type them? So Lorraine's come back and said yes, but some of it has been due to a lack of resources. That point. Mary, not really, but we have a requirement coming into effect to become certified as a research organisation. This might sound a slightly bizarre connection. Driving in this morning, hearing about Jimmy Savile and the government report on the extent of his activities within Stoke Mandeville, it always makes me wonder, and it's something for us to think within our own management systems. There weren't a set of requirements in there, or if they were not being enforced, they were not being managed. And that vulnerability that existed within the NHS in this case, it's vulnerabilities that I see in lots of different management systems and lots of different arenas. And often organisations say we've got a good management system, but actually you may not. And unless you're trying to build a management system against a standard, those frailties may not be revealed. Lorraine's picked up and added lack of supervision. Lorraine, do you mean lack of supervision within your organisation of activities that have been undertaken? Could you just... No. Oh, I see. Yes, indeed. No, fair point, Lorraine. Lorraine makes the connection, lack of supervision of Jimmy Savile, indeed so. But actually, monitoring is a specific requirement that exists within 18,001, as it does with 14,001, and is quite an extensive clause. And one of the key features of a good management system is the ability to check on whether or not it's being applied effectively. So the monitoring clause, which has extensive supervision, the auditing clause, these are strong clauses, but actually, in my experience, they can often be weak links from a management system point of view within organisations. Okay, thank you for your contributions there, Lorraine and Mary. I'm going to move, just before I move us on away from university-related hazards, when I gave a little bit of thought to what the hazards might be and the extensive, diverse nature of universities and all of those, and actually managing activities off-site, it did strike me, as I put in bold at the bottom, your hazards are extensive and a lot of them are significant. Possibly more, well, I suppose your environmental hazards are significant as well, but certainly comparable, if not maybe exceeding it, I would speculate. Okay, moving on. Right, we do have now some specific questions to encourage you to give us an indication of the nature of your organisation and where it fits maybe with OHSAS 18001. Alex, do you want to just remind us how we're going to go through this?
Yes, well, I suppose similar to how it's what we've been doing so far. If you do have a microphone and are able to speak, then just raise your hand and we will unmute you. If not, then just type the question and we will read them out and answer them.
Fine, thanks Alex. Right, I'm going to take us through to the... Yeah, good idea. If I can go screen on that side. Right, host-led questions. I'm going to read all of these and then give you a moment to think which ones would you be interested to respond to. And if you are typing, if you could just indicate which number question you're responding to. So I'll just take a moment to read them out. So first of all, what are the difficulties in managing some of your hazards? To what extent are significant hazards managed effectively? If you want to sort of express that on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 not at all, 10 were terrific, don't need anything. Question 3, are hazards extensively risk assessed within your organisation? I'm sure you'll know that risk assessment is at the heart of health and safety and indeed environmental management systems. And so if it's at the heart, if it's the foundation, then you've got to do it properly, you've got to do it effectively, you've got to do it comprehensively. And when I was undertaking health and safety assessments on behalf of the insurance industry, this was a weak area. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts. Are your risk assessments any good? Are they extensive enough? And are they being managed in terms of the controls that have been identified? So 4, perhaps we've answered this, but if you've got anything you want to add, where's the weak link in your system? When we were speculating about what Jimmy Savile reveals to us, I think Lorraine volunteered that lack of supervision. So is monitoring suitably extensive and effective? Are you able to discover problems that are going on? So, can that be slightly bigger?
I can't,
unfortunately. No, don't worry. Just bear with us when we read a few of the questions. Oh, that's it. So, Lorraine said we have campuses across 5 sites which are all managed very differently with different levels of competency of staff. Yeah, in which case, Lorraine, then having a standard and using 18001 might help you to start to harness and make consistent some of those systems. Does that make sense? Does that sound appropriate, or have I missed the point you're making? Just waiting for Lorraine to see if... Thank you, Lorraine. We are certainly looking towards... Oh, okay, that's interesting. We are certainly looking towards aligning with 18001. It is remarkable, actually, with looking at large organisations with multiple sites. It is remarkable sometimes the divergence between the different systems that can apply to those different sites. But conversely, part of the problem can be if you have a top-down, very autocratic, specification-led management system that all sites need to adhere to. It precludes flexibility and the ability of organisations to develop meaningful systems for those individual sites. So it's an interesting spectrum. Moving on to the next question. Paul's gone for question 4, which is related to the weak link. So a significant weak link, as well as contractors, is the devolved management for health and safety to academic schools and departments. Paul, do you mean by that that your management system is not sort of centrally led by a health and safety centre or department, and that you're giving the responsibilities into the individual departments to manage health and safety within those areas? Is that correct? Just waiting for Paul's response. Yes, responsibility go to know to manage. What problem does that lead to? Is it the fact that the academics don't treat it as significant and important and haven't got the time to address to health and safety? Is Paul's saying yes to that? Okay, interesting. In which case, it might be prudent then for the organisation to argue in favour of adopting a standard, 18001, to help govern your management system. And if you're going for that standard and you're being independently assessed, those problems will start to get revealed and maybe put under the noses of senior people within your organisation. Okay, looking at a few more questions. Thank you for that, Paul. Interesting intervention. Look where I'm up to it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Size and structure of organisation. The colleges work in some instances as mini organisations in their own right due to the size and nature of their activity. That's Louise. That actually sounds to me like a similar point that Paul's made, doesn't it? That the responsibility for health and safety has been increasingly devolved to different levels of the organisation, which can be good if the right resources are put in place and the right people have the passion and the knowledge to be able to implement it. Right. Right, number 3, which is risk assessments. It is risk assessments, I think, isn't it? Thank you. Lorraine's commented, currently very difficult to determine how extensively risk assessments are being managed. Interesting. So Louise, who does the risk assessments then? Are they undertaken by the academics at the coalface when they're undertaking experiments? Colleges. So I have to say then, yes, right, okay, academics, and the academics don't perhaps get the importance of undertaking risk assessments. It's a bit of a tick box approach, something to do late on a Friday afternoon and don't privilege. Would that be correct? Louise has commented that actually the risk assessments are taken by the people completing the work, which makes sense, except that those people who are undertaking the work may not actually understand the nature of risk and what it means. They may not understand the nature of controls, and they may just treat it as a hurdle they've got to quickly overcome so they can get on and do the job. And then Louise has added, I think they underestimate the hazards. Interesting. We're getting quite a bit of comment on risk assessments. They do see it as extra paperwork, Louise has pointed out. Mary's then supplemented, they write the risk assessments, but their managers approve them. Well, that could be a sensible response. And then Louise has further added tick box and a barrier to getting on. Oh, I see what you mean, a barrier to getting on and doing the job. Now, they're all very interesting observations and reveal that you're clearly concerned about the take-up or the effectiveness of risk assessments being undertaken. When I'm doing health and safety implementation courses, 2-day courses, I could spend, and I do sometimes spend with organisations, perhaps a quarter of that time just looking at risk assessments and actually spending a big chunk of time identifying the reasons why risk assessments can be poor, why they're not undertaken effectively. It's not easy, but actually For any organisation looking to have an effective management system, your risk assessments have got to be not only comprehensive, covering all of the hazards that are taking place, but they've also got to be they've got to be good. And that means the format needs to be good. The people undertaking it need to be appropriate, need to attribute sufficient time and energy to undertaking it effectively. Lots of things can go wrong with this. Okay, have we got a few more to look at? This is an interesting set of responses, thank you. What about this?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, okay. Lorraine has added, I'll listen to question 4, which is, where's the weak link? Lorraine has said, our weak link is the academics. They don't attend the training. They think they know it. That's very interesting. They don't see it as their job to do risk assessments. They think the technicians should do it. This can cause conflict. Roles are sometimes poorly defined. Very straightforward. Very interesting, Lorraine. I always remember doing an assessment of a laboratory in the past. I think it would have been health and safety. And I didn't really know much about academics at that point. And my expectation, I think, was, gosh, this should be good. I mean, these people are bright and they understand the importance of health and safety. That was my expectation. And ever since, the memory has been seared onto my sort of auditing conscience. Wherever somebody is academic and capable and perhaps a scientist, that does not necessarily mean that they understand and manage health and safety. Quite the reverse, actually. What I detected on that couple of days was a remarkable cavalier, complacent attitude to their safety, actually, not just simply their colleagues, but to their safety. But somehow they're so experienced and so competent and capable that they have this sort of invisible mask that will protect them from anything that could go wrong. So I sympathise with you, and I suspect that's a heck of a hurdle you're going to have to overcome. Not quite sure what the solution is. Perhaps it might be more top-down, and they just simply have to fall in line, and with active supervision, once you've identified what the controls are, the supervision can reveal when they're not adhering to it. Interesting. Okay.
There was one last point from Louise about senior management team buy-in to a management system. I don't know.
Right, okay. Currently need senior management team to buy into a management system, indeed, Louise. And actually that anecdote I gave, or that possible solution where academics are being flagrantly not bothering with health and safety, I mentioned there, well, you reveal it, you supervise, you reveal the discrepancies, but then actually you need senior management to say, you're absolutely right, academics get on with it. Pull the line, adopt these controls in your risk assessments. In any management system, you'll know this, you've got to have that top management buy-in. I did work at Nottingham City Council a very long time ago. There was a tremendous director within environmental services who used 14001 as a bit of a battering ram to change the culture within the department. And I was involved with leading the implementation of 14001 within this department. And the only way that I could get that through was the director banging on people's desks, making a monthly meeting with those senior managers to look at the progress that they've made with the management system. Without that commitment, without that obvious determination of the most senior manager within that department, it wasn't going to happen. So I know the situation that you're in. If you are now looking to start to improve your health and safety management system, you're going to have to get that senior management buy-in. A very interesting set of observations. I do appreciate how you've responded. I'm going to change, I've got another set of questions actually, which I'd like a similar approach to. What I have no real understanding of is civil claims in relation to the university sector. I have seen lots of different cultures with civil claims. So the first question is, treat these as 1, 2, 3, 4, if you would please. Is there a culture of civil claims within your university? By that I mean, it's fairly endemic, it's fairly entrenched, it's pretty much expected if you have an accident that you're going to be able to put a claim in at some future point. How extensive are civil claims? Can you give me any figures? Some organisations I work with, quite large, if they have one in a 2 or 3 year period, it's surprising. Other small organisations I work with, there could be 4 or 5 in a period of a year. So give us an idea if you'd like to show that. Is your organisation, number 3, is your organisation able to repel, defend against the claims? Those of you who are involved in this, you understand what I'm getting at there. Do you actually, are you able to provide your underwriters, your brokers, with sufficient information to be able to make sure it doesn't go anywhere? Or does your underwriter just simply say, we haven't got enough, you can't demonstrate that the person was suitably informed, we're just going to have to settle? And number 4, has your organisation been prosecuted by the HSE at any point during the last 5 years? If you want to be candid and straightforward, I think we've got a few responses. So number 1, which is there a culture of civil claims? Lorraine saying generally no. Some of the lower grades will claim. Okay. When we say will claim, what sort of, can you put a number on it, Lorraine? That's a different quote. To have extensive claims. Lorraine goes on to say generally very low. Oh, I see. Thank you, Lorraine. 1 or 2 a year. Well, that's good. Okay. Becky's volunteered. Not particularly. 2 on average per year. That's interesting. Similar to Lorraine. Of both student and staff claims, mainly slip and trip claims. Okay, so it's not serious. Louise, in relation to number 1, yes, we do have a number of civil claims, probably 5 a year. Well, that's a few, isn't it? Number 3 is your organisation to repel. We did have a serious accident that we decided to fight and won. Excellent. Okay. Lorraine said that. Well, I'm impressed, actually, I have to say. You don't hear that very often. Both the desire to fight and then actually the ability to win. I did have a recent client who had all of the evidence they needed to. They did indeed press the underwriter to fight, but in the end the underwriter still settled before it went to court in order to avoid what could have been a significant hit. So well done, that's impressive and that's interesting. Becky, routinely have to settle. As cannot demonstrate management of the hazard. Yes, that's what I typically see, Becky, particularly slip and trip, even when it's undertaken. That's frustrating, isn't it? I would hope and expect that with a robust health and safety management system meeting the requirements of 18001, you're much more likely to be able to resist and repel those. Sometimes what can be key, and where organisations fall down, is they don't immediately and actively investigate the accident in the first place. And this will all be something that you can look at, but with a current client, they make an immediate evaluation as to whether or not an investigation is required, and they've got a pretty simple cut-off in terms of whether or not an investigation is required, but 2 or 3 managers will sit down and say, this could go somewhere, we know what's happened in the past, and they investigate with a view to gathering as much evidence as they can to be able to provide to the underwriter, but also they're communicating to staff who might think they might fabricate or enhance the nature of an accident. They're communicating to staff, hey, better watch out because photographs will be taken and people will be interviewed. Right, moving on. So Louise has gone on to say how extensive our claims. She's gone on to say there does not seem to be much defence against civil claims, as there is a lack of investigation documentation currently. Yes, well, I've only just read that out after the previous point I've made. I think you're right, Louise. I think the investigation can be a fundamental part of being able to resist these. With a university site and a large organisation, what's very tricky with civil claims is it's not necessarily the severity of the accident that leads to the claim, and it's very hard to anticipate which ones will, and often fairly minor, what we would think to be minor and innocuous, can still lead to the claim. Right, number 4, Lorraine. Number 4, which is your organisation up to repel. Number 4, Lorraine's added. HSE last came in 2007, and we were issued a prohibition notice. Thank you, Lorraine. Has the prohibition notice been lifted? And would you like to explain what it was connected to? I'll just give Lorraine a moment. I will move on then. Louise, question 2, how extensive are claims? This is something I'm working on. I'm new to post and tightening this up. Interesting. Okay. Lorena said yes to my previous... oh, it has been lifted. Good. Well done. Does that now mean that the HSC have got you on your radar and they may well be... so any time you might have a riddle, they may be coming on site? Is that fair? Is that correct? We had a void area steering wheel which was unsafe. Okay, thank you. Right, Lorraine has also added, students who are entering this area, okay,
Yes, the void area.
Oh right, yeah, students who are entering this area and picking their wood potential for wood falls, oh I see. No, they had a serious incident and they didn't come. Ah, that's interesting though, okay. I have to say, I wouldn't want organisations to develop OHSAS 18001 simply to be able to resist the HSE. That's not possibly a good enough reason in itself. Okay. Paul was said, Becky and I have to go. Oh right, so I have to say to committee meeting now. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for letting us know, Paul. And Becky. Yes, thank you. Perhaps when you get a moment later, could you complete the evaluation that's at the end of the presentation? Thank you. Could I just check who's left and how long have you got? So the time is now 1:50. So if we went on for another 20 minutes, would that be okay for everybody? Yes, could you raise your hand if that's okay, another 20 minutes, please? Okay, Lorraine, Louise and Mary have indicated that's fine. Is Richard still with? Okay, well I'll press on the basis of 20 minutes. Thank you, these are excellent responses. I'm very pleased that these questions have generated some interest. So, final set, let me just see what I'm up to. Yes, final set of our questions, and then I'm going to hand over to you in terms of anything you'd like to check out with us. So, see which ones of these might generate some interest. I've got 5, if you could number them in that way. So, does your insurance underwriter encourage your organisation to improve health and safety performance? Just as a slight aside to that, I am quite surprised and dismayed, certainly in the past, not quite, of the lack of vigilance of underwriters in terms of trying to make sure that their insureds are managing health and safety effectively. So what are your thoughts on that? What's your experience? Number 2, is the HSE pushing your organisation to improve health and safety performance? Any reactions there? Number 3, is the university sector privileging or increasing the priority of health and safety performance? That's something that, Loris, we're not quite sure what the situation is. So is there any drive within the university sector to improve health and safety? 4, is your top management mandating improved health and safety performance? We've had an earlier comment to do with hoping to get the senior management team to buy in. What's everyone else's thoughts about this? Do you actually believe you've got top management driving this? From your point of view, finally, are there any other drivers for your system? Yes. What means that your health and safety should be good, should be effective? What might some of those drivers be? So if you could number those 1 through to 5, and that will help us relate.
1 to 5.
I'll stop 20 minutes. So right, thank you, Alex. So number 5, driver. The driver for us is the student experience, right? And the fact that they are paying. If we have to close a laboratory due to safety, then this would impact on the student experience. Very interesting. Okay, I haven't thought of that actually. I guess, yes, okay, that's very interesting. Okay, I think just acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Any more? Number 4, top management here. Mary's indicated. Good support from top management, excellent. 5, other drivers are the users at the bench. Do you mean, Mary, when you say users at the bench, you mean people working on the laboratory, within the labs? Is that right? Working in the labs? We're assuming that's the case. Okay. And yes, Mary's confirmed it. Thank you. Workers in the labs protecting themselves. Absolutely. When I outlined the benefits at the top, we talked about protecting people. It's funny, when I ask organisations, when I'm starting work with them, or indeed working with a group looking at health and safety, asking them, why are you doing this? It can be a little bit startling and a bit dismaying that when I reflect back to them after they've fed back, that actually reducing risk or improving people's health and safety can sometimes be omitted. We must never, ever forget that. Mary's own workers in the labs. Okay. Have we got any other responses?
No, I think that's it.
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just give you all just a moment if you just want to visually and mentally flick through those questions in case there's anything else you'd like to add. Okay. Could I just ask everybody then, in terms of top management commitment, this isn't going anywhere, is it? So could each individual, on a scale of 1 to 5, indicate where they think their top management is in relation to pushing health and safety performance? So 5 is terrific, no problems at all. 1 is they don't seem to have really heard about it. So could I get a few scores? Some are coming through. Mary's already said 5, Lorraine 3. And any more? And Louise 4 to 5. It's not on their agenda though. Oh right, but and then Richard 3. Okay. Louise, if it's not on their agenda and you're scoring at 4 or 5, can you explain why that might be? How come it's a high score? Do you mean that despite not being on their agenda, that they naturally treat health and safety as being important? If you want to add to that, that would be helpful, but don't worry. Okay, this is Louise, thank you. Currently, and I'm new, I don't think it's something that they believe is very important. Right, okay, Louise. Yeah, have I read it right, Alex?
Yeah, no, I think maybe Louise called it the other way around.
Oh, right, yes.
Right,
okay. No, I think, yeah. And then Louisa said they think we are managing. Oh, okay, that's interesting. They think we are managing just fine without their intervention. And okay, just picking up on that then, the reality, so to what extent 5 is fantastic, we've not got a problem, 1 is, well, we do realise there's more work to do. Score your management system in terms of how effective it is in delivering health and safety performance, please. 5, terrific. 1, oh dear, a lot of work to do. Can we score right?
Yeah.
Mary, 4 to 5, great. Just waiting for a few more. Louise discreetly says a lot of work to do. Okay, thank you. And Lorraine, 3, but we are working on it with an online dedicated system. Okay. Right, well in a moment I'm just going to start looking at how you might use 18,001, so it's interesting to have these scores in. Online dedicated system, I'm intrigued, I haven't possibly got time to go there. I'm immediately suspicious about whether or not an online dedicated system can manage all of your health and safety requirements. But anyway, I'll let that scepticism float. Maybe that's a discussion another time. Right, I'm going to move on to the next bit. Thank you very much for these questions. As in what?
As in kind of...
Oh, I see. Oh, no, fair enough, Lorraine. I understand that. I'm sorry. Okay, you weren't positing it as a grand solution. Document control makes a lot of sense. Yeah, okay, I understand. Great, thank you. Right, and now, just before I start to wrap up, I do want to give you an opportunity Yes, are there now any questions from your point of view? We've restricted you and we've constrained you with our questions, but would you like to ask any questions at this point? We've got 13 minutes and I will be strict. I won't go over that now. So any questions from your point of view? I'll give you a moment. Don't worry if not, but if there is anything, we'd be happy to field it at this point. Okay, well at the end, if you do have any indeed, they can come through to Alex and Sarah. Thanks. So, yes, how could you use OHSAS 18001? Right, yes, you could go for the typical solution, I guess, the solution that you'll have adopted perhaps with ISO 14001. You could use the independent certification by an accredited certification body. But it can be used in lots of other ways, I think. So you could use the standard to simply assist you with using it to be able to improve your system. I think if you think, I'm going to give you a visual, I can't draw, come on. I'm going to describe a flip chart for you, so let's see what your mental picture is like. Top of the page, if I wrote OHSAS 18001 down, you imagine you maybe do this as where you are. 18001 at the top, and then in the middle of the page, if you write Health and Safety Management System, and then put a line from the Health and Safety Management System up to the standard, and an arrow pointing up to the standard, and then if you put the Health and Safety Management System, you've got in the middle, and then finally at the bottom of the page, you've got implementation, and you've got an arrow going from management system to implementation. Now, without 18001, you are creating a system in the dark, I think. We do have very extensive legislation in this country which produces quite a bit of your management system. But if you take away 18001, then all you're left with, you've got to devise and divine and guess what that management system needs to be. And then on top of that, you've got to make sure that it's implemented. So the way I see it, 18001 is a very powerful tool to enable you to check whether or not you've got a good system, and where you haven't, to be able to fill the weaknesses. So it improves your system. Then up the next bullet, diagnose where the weaknesses are. When I was doing assessments for the insurance industry over about a 2 or 3 year period, all of the other assessors were testing against legislation, or indeed what they thought was important for any management system. I was quite extensively using 18001 to help me diagnose where the gaps were, and then be able to identify what needed to be done. So you can use it for that from that point of view. And it does provide a framework, as I've sort of just talked about. And then finally, actually provide internal auditors with a framework to test your system. Even if you're not down for 18001, internal auditors could find it a very useful tool to be able to test the efficacy and the extent of your management system. So yes, you can use the top route, if you like, the independent certification, but there are lots of other ways in which you could choose to use 18001. Right, moving on. We are now at the wash-up. How long have we got? Okay, so we are wrapping up. So let's just look at the objectives. So the objectives are on, here they are. So that's giving you an overview of 18001. It's a standard for management systems. It's at the second iteration, original 99, current 2007, and there will be ISO 45001 in 2016. The benefits associated with 18001, we've touched on a number. I think all of my experience tells me it's a very good tool to make sure you've got a very good system. And without it, I don't know how organisations divine whether or not they've got a good system. It's a design brick. It's not an exam paper. Too many organisations see standards as exam papers. They're not. They're a design brief to help you create something, a system that's effective. We have touched on how the standard might be used to improve your health and safety management system. I'm very mindful of some of the feedback that you've been given to some of the questions. Risk assessments really seem to be an area that you are concerned with. 18,001 is about a page and a half, arguably too long. There's a page and a half of a set of things that risk assessments needs to achieve. And actually, that could be a very good starting point for a number of you to go from in terms of what next. Well, have a look at 18,001, clause 431, and maybe test what you're already doing against it. And then finally, I think your fulsome responses have given Sarah, Alex and I an insight into your sector and how you're viewing 18,001 perhaps. So those are the objectives. What next? Well, there is going to be a survey. Alex, do you want to just touch on that?
Yeah, I think as you exit the webinar, there should be some 4 or 5 questions. If you wouldn't mind just taking a minute to answer those, it would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alex. And Sarah, there's 2 possible routes following this webinar. Well, one is 18,001 introduction, but could you just touch on the health and safety e-learning and how that might work for organisations?
Yeah, that we've developed a health and safety e-learning course, which you complete online. It's sort of a basic level, which you want to use sort of general staff training, and we can provide more information on this if it's of interest.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And then the other route, and part of what we're asking is whether or not it would be interesting for you to have a one-day introduction to the detail that sits in 18,001 and really enabling you to actually look at whether or not it's for your organisation. So if you are interested in that, then let Sarah and Alex know. And then indeed, more generally, further information is available through Sarah and Alex, and telephone numbers there. And happy if there's any other questions, because we've got 5 minutes if that would be helpful, and we're more than happy to follow up. So final opportunity to ask any specific questions. Right, okay, I have got one. Is that right?
Yes.
So Lorraine, thank you. Do you think that some people do with HSG65 because it is easy to read following 18,001 standard? Well, funnily enough, Lorraine, the one that prior to the 2013, I didn't think that was necessarily true. 90-odd pages. It had got very much out of touch in terms of where management systems were at. The more recent iteration, I think you're probably right. Having said that, it is 50 pages. And so as you read 50 pages, you will naturally be editing out things that you would choose to do and things you would choose not to do. So in that sense, it's not a standard. 18,001, I think, could be clearer, Lorraine. It's pretty good. It's not as good as 14,001, 2004, in terms of clarity. Hopefully they'll pick up on that with ISO 45,001. Oh right, okay, thank you, Lorraine. You've responded positively and said indeed. Yeah. Okay, good. So yeah, I think be careful how be careful how you use HSG 65. It is not a standard. Anyway, thank you. You've obviously have been listening. Thank you. Any other final questions? I've got a gavel in my hand, metaphorically, starting to come down. Okay, so just clarifying what next. Get in touch with Sarah and Alex. How do you think the change to the ISO 45001 will affect decisions to go for certification? I think I will be expecting, Mary. I do think with OHSAS there's been an impediment within business and within organisations. Somehow it's not a well-respected standard. It wasn't true. So I think the fact that ISO is going to be in front of this, I think, will give it a real drive. And I think the other slightly odd thing is health and safety. Well, give you this as a little bit of an inkling. When I'm working with organisations to develop effective systems to meet health and safety, it is and often is a relatively easy task for me from a consultant point of view, because there's lots that's already in place. Whereas Every organisation I've taken through 14,001, it's a standing start. There's nothing in place. And part of that is really, there's not that much environmental legislation that affects extensively businesses and how they operate. Whereas health and safety, there's lots of European-led legislation adopted by the UK, which means there's lots that organisations already have to do. So I'm surprised at the lack of take-up of 18,001 in some ways, and I would hope and expect that 45,001 will drive it on. I hope that's a reasonable answer, Mary. So, right, you've been terrific. It's been a small group, but despite that, there's been plenty of contribution, lots of interesting responses, and do appreciate how attentive and responsive you've been this afternoon. So yes, your time and contribution has been much appreciated. So from me, Nick, and from
Sarah.
Alex.
We'll say goodbye and wish you a happy rest of the afternoon. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All that.